Hi, I'm Michael Jacobsen and welcome to this episode of The Business of Creativity. Today we're interviewing Lohan Presencer, the chairman of the Ministry of Sound Group. Ministry of Sound started as one single nightclub in London 26 years ago, and today it's a multinational corporation covering various different industries. Lohan is tasked with steering what started off as an entrepreneurial enterprise into a large growing company, mixing creativity and business. Let's see how he does it. Lohan Presencer, welcome to the Business of Creativity. Thanks for being with us today.
Thanks, Michael.
Lohan, you're the chairman of Ministry of Sound globally, household name. How does one nightclub in the UK become a global brand?
It's a question we ask ourselves often, and when we look back on our history, I think it's very easy to post-rationalise that journey and unpack how it happened. But very simply, a couple of people had an idea back in 1989 that revolved around creating a nightclub that was about the music, about the sound, about the experience that people were having, rather than about selling booze or meeting girls or the traditional things that went on in nightclubs. Yes. It was very much about the music, very much about the purity of the sound system, very much about that authenticity. It was very much influenced by the New York nightclubs of the late 1980s, the Paradise Garage, the Sound Factory, Studio 54, where house music was really born and started to grow. And a British DJ, a guy called Justin Berkman, came back from having spent some time in New York DJing with this fantastic idea. He met James Palumbo, now Lord Palumbo, who was looking for investment opportunities. They had a conversation, they put a small team together, they drove around London trying to find a site, and they found this disused Bush garage in Elephant and Castle. Yes. And the whole idea was in Justin's head. Everything from the layout of the venue, to the name, to the shape of the logo, to the fact that in time they would release compilation albums. It was all there.
But it's a classic entrepreneurial story,
absolutely.
Really, right down to the driving around London.
He had the idea, but then James held his feet to the fire and said, you know, that doesn't work, this does work. And together as a small team of people, they moved the pieces of the jigsaw around, and after 18 months, they, by hook or by crook, got this club open, and it was an instant success. It was just the most talked about nightclub ever in the history of the world.
And still is.
It still is. It's still the most famous club in the history of the world.
And a couple of, 20 years later, a couple of decades later, you're running the ship now.
Yes.
So it's really moved from, and I don't think you consider yourself an entrepreneur, but yet you're executing and expanding and growing globally the original entrepreneurial vision. So it's really gone through an interesting progression where it started off as this entrepreneurial story driving around London looking for disused warehouses to today you're steering the growth of a multinational corporation.
Well, I think we often refer back to that original story, and it's you notice how easily it trips off the tongue when we're looking at everything that we do and every new business opportunity that we're reviewing, because the essence of what they did at the beginning is what one needs to think about when one's entering any new business. What is it? What are the factors that differentiate us from everybody else that's out there? How can we achieve excellence in every aspect of what we're doing? How can we work harder and deliver better than anybody else is doing? How can we stand out and continue to stand out? And not just words, actually meaningfully saying it and really taking apart why our business is different to everybody else. So
that entrepreneurial culture is still pervading and still fertilised and fostered within the company.
Very much so, very much so. And we are not frequently, but not infrequently, launching into new business categories all the time. I'm not saying that they are always succeeding, and we've had our fair share of failures over the last nearly 3 decades.
Yes.
However, we've succeeded in several areas, and some of them very, very successfully, particularly the music industry, where we dovetailed from being a nightclub to becoming a record company, and we became the largest independent record company in the world.
And is there any new developments that you're working on at the moment, the company's working on, that you can share?
Well, the big project that we're working on at the moment is, having sold our record company, which we did to Sony Music Entertainment last summer.
Congratulations.
Thank you. We were able to refocus our attention on some areas that we were very excited about but hadn't had the headspace to look at properly beforehand. And I'm delighted to announce that early next year we'll be opening our first co-working space for creative and creative tech businesses.
Wonderful.
Which we're opening around the corner here in South London, in
Yes.
Borough. It'll be 50,000 square foot of fantastically
Wow, it's a
beautiful
monstrous size.
old Victorian office building, and there'll be over 700 people working in there in a superb tailor-made environment for creative businesses.
That's amazing. That's one of a kind. And you'll run programs. You'll foster these individuals' creativity somehow.
I'm very optimistic it won't be one of a kind. I think this is a type of opportunity, a type of workspace that nobody has achieved beforehand, and I think there are multiple opportunities not only here in London, in the UK, but also all over the world. Wherever there is a creative community,
Yes.
I believe there needs to be a workspace environment that is specifically designed for that community, understands the needs of creative people, creates the environment where they can network, forge those connections, where they can get support and advice and mentoring on how to grow their businesses, potentially even investment, and where they can genuinely flourish and they have the flexibility to scale up and scale down, because a lot of creative businesses go through those cycles. So that's what our workspace business will bring to people.
Well, if you excuse the pun, that's music to the ears of the business of creativity, because we think that's exactly the sort of thing that's needed in the creative community.
Well, I hope you can have an office there, Mike.
Absolutely. Count me in. One of the things which I'm detecting from what you're saying, which is obvious, the growth of this business, a lot of it is really supported by the brand Ministry of Sound, which, as we said before, is a household name globally. A brand is an intangible. It's hard to say exactly what goes in it. Of course, you've got the entrepreneurial spirit, you've got the fact that you're executing and succeeding and growing day to day, and you've got, of course, the enormous goodwill that is directed towards the brand. As a business, how important is the brand in terms of your expansion, and how do you fertilize that brand in a commercial sense day to day? It's
very interesting when one de facto becomes a custodian of a brand. One has to think about it from the perspective of how people see it from the outside, from the perspective of how people see it from inside of the business, and then the reality of what it actually means and what it actually delivers. And then, of course, how you treat it. My view is that I think good brands are actually tremendously resilient, and you can try different businesses out and you can fail at those businesses, and they don't have everlasting damaging impacts on the brand, and you shouldn't allow protection or overprotection of a brand to prevent you from being entrepreneurial, particularly if your brand, like ours, has a reputation for being entrepreneurial and experimental.
So you can be a bit bold.
We've got to be bold, you've got to try things out, you can't be afraid. You can't be afraid of failing. I think one of the great things about our brand is obviously it's rooted in nighttime entertainment, so it has an inherent coolness about it.
Yes.
So we're very lucky in that regard. We have to respect that, and there are certain areas and categories that we just can't go into, and it wouldn't be appropriate for us to be doing children's toys, for example. It's just not an appropriate positioning of the brand. But we instinctively know that. That's relative common sense. So I think when you're managing the brand, common sense is at the utmost. And
gut feel's a good guide.
And there's a decent group of people within the business who work with the brand on a day-to-day basis, who will put their hand up and point fingers at things that feel like the incorrect usage of a brand. But I think the reality of when you're running a business that has a brand is, do not believe that the brand is a magic passport through to success. It just simply isn't. So whenever we're developing new businesses, whenever we're being entrepreneurial, we look fundamentally at the product, and we look at it from all angles, and we kick the tires on it constantly, because we need to be utterly convinced that our product, as I said earlier, is totally differentiated, is better than everybody else's, has a reason to succeed and a reason to exist in the market. And then at that point, you look at whether the brand is appropriate for that product. The brand is a marketing tool. It is a positioning statement. And if your product is great, then you ask the question, does the brand lift that product? Is it neutral to that product, or is it negative for that product? And if it's a positive, then you look at the way that the brand is implemented on that product, but it is only ever a marketing leg up.
Yes.
If the product is not good enough, The brand is not a magic passport to success.
Yes, and so is that how you analyse things? I mean, it's almost you're looking at the art and the commerciality simultaneously when you're looking to expand into a new areas or new
Always.
opportunities.
I mean, often one of my predecessors drew me a graph once when I just joined here and said the if you imagine Ministry of Sound is two exponential curves. One is commerciality and one is creativity, and the trick when Ministry of Sound is being brilliant and being perfect, it balances very carefully on the top of that spike, and it's being very
interesting, yes.
being very commercial, and it's being very creative at the same time. Because if you become too creative, you can fall down the other side,
yes.
and you lose all your commerciality.
You lose all your money too.
You lose all your money. If you try to be too commercial, you lose all your coolness.
Yes.
So the trick is to sit on that spike.
It's good advice for any.
It's a very uncomfortable position to sit on.
Yes, perfect advice for any creative entrepreneur. And moving on from that, I believe there's a disconnect with a lot of creative entrepreneurs, particularly startups and growth businesses. But in general, there's a disconnect between creatives and commerciality. A lot of creatives have the struggling artist syndrome, where they think they have to be poor, frankly, and have a problem with monetizing their own commerciality, whether it be to be a millionaire or whether it be to just pay the bills for their own life. And similarly, a lot of people in the investment community view investments in the entertainment or creative sector as fun, no doubt about it, but they don't always see it as a hard business case and as something which can generally make returns. We're doing what we can here at the Business of Creativity to fix that paradigm. I'm sure that your co-working space will go a long way towards that. What would you say to creative entrepreneurs, for instance, the 700 people who occupy your space? What would you say to them about this art and commerce paradigm and how they can move forward?
I'm possibly not the best person to ask, because I definitely sit on the commercial side of things. I think if you are uncommercial at the expense of creativity, I'm not quite sure what you're doing.
Yes.
I think if you're in business, if you're intending to be in business, you need to create products that people want. You need to understand your customer base. You need to understand the nature of your competition. You need to understand the nature of the market and your position within that. And then you have to be able to successfully market your product. And there's no point sitting on a high horse and saying, no, this is all about my art, this is all about my creativity, if there's no audience for it.
Right, yes.
And if there's no audience for it and you can't make a living from it, then fantastic that it's about your art.
Yeah.
But then you're doing it for yourself.
It's not a business.
It's not a business, you're just doing it for yourself.
Yes.
So if you're in a creative business, you have to identify a market for your product, adapt your product accordingly, and market it properly. So I've got no shame in the commerciality of a creative business. And frankly, if people are making art for art's sake, then it's not really of interest to us.
Yes. Well, that's what the Business of Creativity is about, commercializing your creativity so that you can spend your life paying the bills, doing what you love.
Doing what you love. But sometimes you may have to make compromises.
Yes.
And I think a lot of creative people might find that difficult.
Yes. Great advice. Lohan Presencer, thanks for being with us on the Business of Creativity.
Thank you.